Good morning. Today is Tuesday, September 2nd, 2025. If a young man and woman get married, it's their first marriage, then during the first week, they are celebrating. It's like it is their personal Yom Tov, their personal holiday. And if the chas and the groom would come to the synagogue, then the prayer of Tachanun would be omitted, because Tachanun is a prayer that's a little bit sad. And so if there's some kind of joy going on, we omit Tachanun. And the entire congregation omits Tachanun because of this chassan, this groom who is here. Another person who does not say Tachanun for a different reason is a mourner. If a person, God forbid, is sitting Shiva for someone in their family, they don't say Tachanun. And there the reason is also because the prayer of Tachanun is kind of a sad prayer, and it could be too much for a person who is already dealing with such a loss, so they omit Tachanun. But if a mourner comes to the synagogue, the mourner omits Tachanun, but the rest of the congregation still says it. So what's the difference? Why does one exempt the entire congregation and the other only exempts themselves? I want to start by asking a question that is asked by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky asked the following question. We have a general principle that in the book of Dvarim, Deuteronomy, many of the mitzvos that we read have already been repeated before. That's why this is a restatement of the earlier part of the Torah, like the Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments. There are also many new mitzvos, but in general, the new mitzvos that are introduced in the book of Dvarim relate to the entire community, not to any individual. They relate to false prophets, monarchy, the judicial system, branches of government, going to war, cities of refuge. These are all societal matters, as opposed to mitzvos that relate to individual actions by individuals in the first 4 books of the Torah. And therefore, based on that premise, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asked the following question. This week's Torah portion, the Parsha Kiseitze, includes the mitzvah of marriage and the mitzvah of divorce. On the surface, marriage and divorce is a private matter. It is a personal relationship between the bride and the groom. So why are these laws taught here in Dvarim? They belong earlier in the book of Vayikra, where we were discussing who is permitted to marry whom. It would have been appropriate there to say, these are the laws of marriage and divorce. Why is it in Dvarim? And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky answers by saying that, yes, it is true that marriage is something that is a matter affecting a man and a woman, a bride and a groom. But marriage and divorce affects the Jewish people as a whole. Because Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, is nothing more than a group of families. And families are the building blocks of the entire Jewish people. You notice throughout the Torah, when there is a census, it always says, Lemishpachosehem, according to their families. Because families are the building block. And in fact, the marriage ceremony reflects this. Because you remember, we've talked about this before. At a wedding, there are actually 2 ceremonies going on. One is a ceremony of giving the ring, the groom gives the ring to the bride. That is a ceremony that creates a relationship between the two of them. And then there's a ceremony of standing under the chuppah and receiving blessings. And that's the ceremony of the two of them as a married couple taking their place as a family within the families of Israel. This is our home, the chuppah. This is our household. And so the rest of the people who are there come and bless them. And this is why we say, as one of the blessings to a newly married couple, that you should build a bayis ne'eman b'Yisrael. You should build a strong, faithful house within Israel. And therefore, we as a community, as a society, need to support marriage with various policies, with various attitudes. We have to look out for marriages that appear to be in trouble, and if we are able to try to intervene, to try to help. And especially we have to look out for anyone who is outside of that structure, because there's so much attention to marriage and families. If a person is not married, if they do not have a family, God forbid they might get lost. And we have to make sure that we are including everybody. And the same thing applies to divorce. Divorce is something that is negative for the Jewish people. There are all sorts of problems that that are the result of divorce. So we have to make sure that we have policies and we look out for people who are divorced. They should not be ignored or forgotten, but rather gathered into our homes. And we should check in on them to make sure they're okay. That's the reason that these mitzvahs are in the book of Devarim, because they are personal mitzvahs, but they are also societal mitzvahs. Many years ago, in my first position, I was involved with helping a couple who were divorcing to arrange a Gett, a Jewish divorce. And in that case, the woman refused to accept the Gett. And it took a lot of effort on my part, and it took a long time. But finally, I managed to arrange that the Gett should take place, and Rav Nata Greenblatt, who I've mentioned to you many times, who used to travel all over for any Jewish purpose, and he's the one who came to New Orleans. This was in New Orleans, and he did the Gett. I was one of the witnesses. When the Gett concluded, the man, newly divorced, took out a bottle of champagne to celebrate. And he really had reason to celebrate, because what his wife had did to him was really terrible, and she delayed it, and she made it very difficult for him. So he took out a bottle of champagne, kosher champagne, to share with us. And Rav Nata Greenblatt said, I'll never forget this. He said, no, it's not appropriate. Even if the marriage was bad, even if divorce is necessary, it still should not be celebrated. Don't drink champagne at a divorce. A friend of mine told me this story. It could be apocryphal. And I want to be clear that I don't agree with the politics of the story that I'm going to tell you, but I'm just telling you the story the way that I heard it from my friend. There were two Hasidim. They were walking in Jerusalem, and one said to the other, today is election day. And the other one said, I'm not going to vote. The first one said, but you have to vote. The Rebbe said we must all vote today. The other man couldn't believe that their Rebbe had actually said that they had to vote, because this is a group of Jews that normally does not participate in the civic life of Israel. Again, I don't agree with this, but I'm telling you the story. So the Chassid, the other man, didn't believe what his friend said, and he went to his Rebbe. And he said to his Rebbe, Rebbe, did you say that we should vote today? And the Rebbe said, yes, you should vote today. Do you mean to say, he asked, that it's a mitzvah or it's only something that is good? And the Rebbe said, it's a mitzvah. Parenthetically, Rav Moshe Feinstein also writes that it is a mitzvah to participate in an election in whatever country you live. But this young man, this chassid, can't believe that the Rebbe is saying this. So he just wants to make sure he's hearing this right. He says, Rebbe, do you mean to tell me that voting in the election today is a mitzvah like eating matzah at the Seder? And the Rebbe said, no. It's like the mitzvah of eating maror at the Seder. A mitzvah is not just a good deed. A mitzvah is a tzivui. It's a commandment of how to act in a specific situation. Divorce is also a mitzvah in this week's Torah portion, like the mitzvah of maror, bitter herbs. If it's necessary, this is how you do it. The Talmud makes it clear that, and the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, codifies this. The first paragraph in the laws of divorce is that when a couple comes to the rabbi, the first thing the rabbi should do is to try to find a way to reconcile the couple, to try to save the marriage. Because we don't want divorces. We want marriages to work out. So you have to try to fix it. And to get professional help if necessary. But sometimes it's not possible. And there's a divorce. I've mentioned this a number of times. There are two very, very worrisome trends in the Jewish world around us today. One is the sharp increase in divorce among couples within the first 6 months of marriage. Causes a lot of heartache, a lot of pain and difficulty. And to try to help this, we need to do a better job in educating young people what to look for in a spouse. What are the expectations of marriage? And how to recognize and take seriously warning signs of character flaws. And I've said this many times, not to hide flaws. And from studies I've seen, the two biggest reasons that for these early divorces, one is when there is drug use on the part of one that was not disclosed. And the other is when there is mental illness that is not disclosed. This idea that a person may have a flaw, but I'm not going to say anything because I want them to get married, that's wrong, that's a sin, that's an aveira. We have to be open about these things so that we do not cause these quick marriages. The second trend might intrigue you, is a rise in divorce in marriage after 25 to 30 years. Now, this group is lower than the others. However, in America, for example, I have the statistic for America. I'm sure it's similar in Canada. Americans over 50 years old are twice as likely to get divorced as people of that age 20 years ago. And you would think once you've made it 25, 30 years, that means presumably you got it down. Presumably you figured it out. Clint Edwards wrote an article about this, and he suggested one of the reasons for this phenomenon is it boils down to, what are we going to talk about after the children leave home? Couples have an empty nest, and now all of a sudden they have to talk to each other at the dinner table. What do they have to talk about? If the main interaction between husband and wife for most of their marriage relates to their children, and they have not worked on developing their own relationship between themselves, what happens when the children are no longer there? So in this article he wrote, he was worried about this happening to him and his wife. And so he said this to his wife. What happens if after the children leave, we don't have anything to talk about? And she said to him, life is full of things to talk about. We just need to make an effort. I married you, not the children. But that's the key. We have to be willing to put in the effort to make sure that there is a close bond of marriage, even when it's just the two of us. And it should include romance and intimacy and subjects to discuss that are important. And we have to put in the effort. And that's what we have to do throughout our marriage. Not focus only on what won't last. The children will not be at home. If our primary interest in each other is our physical attraction, that's going to change over time. If our main interest is the possessions that we accumulate, that's not going to continue to give us as much pleasure. But okay, sadly, sometimes divorce is necessary. And when divorce is necessary, it is a mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvahs. But it's a mitzvah like maror, like eating the bitter herbs. And so making an effort to try to make it work can make all the difference. If we look at the verses in this week's Torah portion about divorce, Jewish divorce, I think we learned some very, very important lessons. First, the Torah is telling us that sometimes a marriage cannot work. In spite of the effort to make it work. And then the Torah tells us there should be a divorce, a Jewish divorce, and how it should take place. But we learned several lessons from this. Number one, a family has a right to be happy. If a couple cannot get along after they have tried hard to do so, God does not require them to continue to live in misery. And while divorce is a misfortune and it should be a last resort, no one should have to live with animosity and strife. That's not the kind of life God wants from us, number one. Number two, the text of the Gett document, the Jewish divorce document, expresses that it is a sefer krisos, a document of cutting apart. In other words, the way our divorce works, Jewish divorce works, is that the divorce is a clean and complete separation with no ties between them anymore. It allows each former spouse to go on with their life without any encumbrance of the former spouse. And this ability to make a fresh start is fundamental to Judaism in every area of life. In addition to that, the Torah's view of the financial settlement is that it preferably should be a lump sum, and there's a way, a formula to figure out how much it would be. But a lump sum that is paid at one time to reduce entanglements of having to wait for payments on an ongoing basis that may or may not come, and then what's the recourse? One payment, it's over, that's it. Number three, when it is a mitzvah to divorce, when clearly a marriage is over, at that point, to withhold participation in a Gett in a Jewish divorce, or to refuse, makes a person into a sinner. To use it for leverage, for what the settlement will be or the custody will be, that is the crime of extortion. And it must be condemned and criticized and never allowed to happen. And that's why every single Jewish couple needs a halachic prenup to avoid this. Because we know that having a halachic prenup avoids these kinds of delays or refusal to participate in a Gett. And the last lesson I want to share is that Jewish divorce is no fault. At a divorce, a Gett, no one discusses, it's your fault, you did this, you did that. No. And it's not a personal failure, and people should not look at it like that. The divorce ceremony requires no admission of guilt or wrongdoing, and it must be voluntary on both sides. It is simply a recognition that we have tried to keep this marriage going and we cannot. And instead of being miserable, we're going to divorce. And here's the important part. When a couple realize that they and their children are better off apart and undergo divorce with respect and civility, that's when they create the best chance to minimize the harmful effects of divorce on children. There are harmful effects of divorce on children, but those, according to research, are not because of the divorce itself. They're because of the animosity. They're because one parent blames the other. They're because each parent tries to get the children to follow them and not the other. If the parents are able to divorce with civility and respect, children are able to escape the negative consequences of divorce. And when that happens, these parents model for their children the ability to treat others with respect, even when things are not going well. And that is one of the most important skills we all need in life. My friends, I wish you a great day. And I look forward to seeing you soon in person.